Jehovah's Witnesses and the United Nations, How the Watchtower Society Fooled Millions. Chapter 3, entitled The Watchtower's Side. Now, it was the British news company The Guardian who first brought this matter to attention to the public eye. It published some articles, the first one being October 8th, 2001, entitled Jehovah's Witnesses Linked to UN Queried. And I will post a link to this so that way you can go to their website and read it for yourself. I am also going to read this and post some snapshots from the internet, so be my guest to either one. So here we go. From this article of The Guardian, again brought to you on Monday, October the 8th, 2001, entitled Jehovah's Witnesses Linked to UN Queried. Sect accused of hypocrisy over association with organization it has demonized. The United Nations is being asked to investigate why it has granted associate status to the Jehovah's Witnesses, the fundamentalist U.S.-based Christian sect, which regards it as the scarlet beast predicted in the book of Revelation. Disaffected members of the 6 million strong group, which has 130,000 followers in the UK, have accused the Witnesses' elderly governing body of hypocrisy and secretly accepting links with an organization that they continue to denounce in apocalyptic terms. Excuse me, getting tongue-tied. Continuing with the article. The UN itself admitted yesterday that it was surprised that the sect, whose formal name is the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society of New York, had been accepted on its list of non-governmental organizations for the last 10 years. A former member said, "There is a glaring inconsistency which has emerged between the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society's frequent portrayal of the UN as an evil organization and its behind-the-scenes attempts to curry favor with that organization. Were individual members to be aware of any formal link, they would be devastated. By no stretch of the imagination could the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society be considered to share the ideals of the UN Charter unless you suppose that destruction of the UN by God is consistent with that charter. The witnesses most frequently encountered by non-members when they attempt to make doorstep conversations have faced accusations of bad faith before. These have been most notably over the hierarchy's insistence that members should not accept blood transfusions and over accusations that sexual abuse of children by witness ministers in the U.S. have been covered up. Followers who criticize the witnesses' leaders or question their decisions are routinely disfellowshipped, which means fellow members, including their families, must shun them. An obscure and ill-publicized decision by the hierarchy in New York last year, modifying the prohibition on transfusion by deeming that God had revealed to them that transfusions of some blood components might be acceptable, providing there was later repentance, has come too late for many hundreds of followers known to have died because they refused blood. In child abuse cases, the hierarchy insists that there must be 2 independent witnesses, an almost impossible stipulation, before accusations are investigated. The Watchtower Society has been denouncing the UN and its predecessor, the League of Nations, for 80 years, believing them to be a world empire of false religion predicted in the book of Revelation. A recent publication since the organization obtained its recognition describes the UN as a disgusting thing in the sight of God and his people. An internal document, the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, describes its policy as theocratic war strategy. It claims, in time of spiritual warfare, it is proper to misdirect the enemy by hiding the truth. It is done unselfishly. It does not harm anyone. On the contrary, it does much good. Being a recognized NGO with the United Nations, as more than 1,500 organizations are, gives status, though not grants. To qualify, organizations must show that they share the ideals of the Charter, operate on a non-profit basis, demonstrate interest in UN issues, and proven ability to reach large or specialized audiences, and have the commitment and means to conduct effective information programs about UN activities. Disaffected witnesses believe that the association, which has not been publicized to followers, is intended to increase the cult's respectability to skeptical governments, such as France's, which have refused to recognize it. Paul Gillies, the witnesses' spokesman in Britain, said, "We do not have hostile attitudes to governing bodies, and if we are to make representation on issues to the UN, we will do so. There are good and bad bodies, just as there are good and bad politicians. We believe what the book of Revelation tells us, but we do not actively try to change the political system." A spokesman for the UN said, "I think we may not be aware of their attitude, which seems to be really strange." End of article. Immediately following the publicity of this article, the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society withdrew their membership, and again, Stephen Bates came out with a follow-up article 6 days later entitled "Hypocrite Jehovah's Witnesses Abandon Secret Link with UN." So we're going to go ahead with the reading of that as well. It begins, "The Jehovah's Witnesses have hurriedly disaffiliated from the United Nations within days of a Guardian story in which members accused the sect of hypocrisy for supporting an organization it has repeatedly denounced privately. After the article last Monday, the organization's New York-based hierarchy preempted a UN inquiry by agreeing to disassociate the witnesses from an organization which it holds to be the scarlet wild beast named in the book of Revelation. The Watchtower Bible and Tract Society of New York, as the sect is formally known, has 6 million members worldwide and 130,000 in Britain. It had been secretly affiliated with the UN as a non-governmental organization for 10 years. Recognized organizations are supposed to demonstrate that they share the UN's objectives, but witnesses are instead told by elders to regard it as a disgusting thing in the sight of God and His people, for allegedly aspiring to world domination like Babylon the Great, the beast in Revelation. The sect does not believe in participating in government and initially strove to play down or deny the evidence of the UN's website, which lists it as one of 1,500 affiliated NGOs. Those bringing the evidence to light were accused of apostasy. Disaffiliated members become known informally, like the rest of humanity, as bird seed, in line with biblical prophecy of the fate of non-believers, whose corpses will be pecked bare by crows. Within hours of the article's appearance on the Guardian website on Monday and its posting on a Jehovah's Witness bulletin board, more than 14,000 people came across the world had read it. By yesterday, there were 353 official posts and 325 message boards discussing the article and its revelations, with witnesses in the U.S. demanding to see copies of the paper. So there you have both articles. The first one was exposing the Watchtower as being members. The second one basically just showed how the Watchtower hurriedly withdrew their membership from the United Nations after they were found out. And so, if you were an ex-witness at the time that all of this was happening, I'm sure you know that this probably went viral among the ex-witness community pretty quickly. And those who were, I guess you could say, faded or non-active, those who were not disassociated or disfellowship, probably tried to share this information with their friends and family. But as we know, this is a high-controlled group. So either they rejected the information because it was negative about their precious organization, or they viewed it as satanic lies. And if they continued sharing this information with others in the congregation, the elders would put an end to it by disfellowshipping that person. So either way, the witnesses were going to try and discount everything in these articles. And of course, the witnesses were going to be ignorant and blind about it, not look at it. But there were some who did open their eyes and look at the evidence for themselves. And eventually, the Watchtower did provide a follow-up letter. So I'm going to post that here and read that for you. So this letter is dated October 22nd, 2001. So this is immediately following the second article published by The Guardian. And it reads, "Dear Sir, Stephen Bates' article in The Guardian of October 8th and 15th substantially misrepresents the background to Jehovah's Witnesses registration with the United Nations and contains a number of factual errors. In 1991, one of our legal corporations registered with the United Nations as a NGO, non-governmental organization, for the sole purpose of getting access to the extensive library of the United Nations. This enabled a writer who received an identification card to enter their library for research purposes and to obtain information that has been used in writing articles in our journals about the United Nations. There was nothing secret about it. At the time of the initial application, no signature was required on the form. Years later, unbeknown to the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses, the United Nations published criteria for association, stipulating that affiliated NGOs are required to support the goals of the United Nations. After learning of the situation, our membership as NGO was withdrawn and the ID card of the writer was returned. Sincerely, Paul Gillis, press officer for the Jehovah's Witnesses in Britain. P.S. Do not publish my email address." So this letter is all kinds of misleading. In the second paragraph, they make it try and sound like it was just one of their legal corporations, like it was any other legal corporation, the Christian Congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses in Pakistan. That wasn't the case. It was the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society of New York, the top dog, the world headquarters with the governing body. The third paragraph states that there was no signature required on the initial application. Okay, well, why did they bring that up? That doesn't really make a difference anyways. Technically, it's true. There was no signature required on that particular form to begin with in 1991. But they didn't tell us that they had to keep signing up each year and reapplying each year, which did require an application on the rest of the forms each and every year after the initial application. And they would also be asked to supply information that would support the UN. That was a requirement of NGOs. So these representatives who would have to be on the application, although no signature was required, wouldn't be able to say they didn't know, because they would sign the form each and every year afterwards and supply information in support of the UN for them to keep their NGO status. So now let's take a look at this application form and the names that were given. So here we have the application form. It is a blank scanned version. And now we see the names of the actually 3 people there at the bottom that were associated with the Watchtower. So who were these 3 men that were listed on these forms? The first one was W. Berry, also known as William Lloyd Berry. He was a member of the governing body until 1999 when he died. So this would indicate that since he was a part of this, the rest of the governing body would have known about this as well. The second man listed was Ciro Alusino, and he was a staff member in the writing department of the Watchtower Society. His duties included obtaining reference sources for the writing department and actually writing some of the articles that were informative, some of the friendly articles regarding the United Nations. The third name listed was Robert Johnson. He was a member of the Watchtower's service department, and the service department's primary function is to provide assistance and direction to the congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses throughout the United States. So we have 12 members of the governing body that knew about this affiliation, as well as a member on the writing department and a member on the service department. Of course, we shouldn't take this to mean that all Bethelites knew about this, because the lower ranking Bethelites were completely unaware of this. That tends to happen not just in this religion, but all religions and probably in business as well. The lower ranking members don't know exactly what the high ranking members are doing behind their backs. So even though the Watchtower Society was claiming that there was no signature needed on the original form, which was true, this was really useless for them to bring out, because members of the Watchtower Society were still listed as representatives for NGO membership, and signatures were still required on other associated documentation each and every year after their initial application. And the author brings this out as well, and I find it interesting. She says that I find it interesting that they brought up that point about signatures at all. As far as I could find, there was nobody asking questions regarding signatures or names at that time. And still the Watchtower Society felt the need to explain it. It's always a suspicious thing when people explain things that weren't even asked of them. And I definitely agree with that viewpoint. So some people believe the Watchtower brought this up about the signatures because it was their way of trying to claim a level of innocence. But it was all BS. We know that. We can see past it. So shortly after writing their statements to the Guardian, the Watchtower Society wrote a second statement for release to its worldwide branches on November 1st of 2001. So let's take a look at that letter. Branch Committee. Dear brothers, because of published allegations by opposers that we have secret links with the United Nations, a number of branches have inquired about the matter, and we have replied. This circular letter replaces any replies we have given earlier and is sent to all branches. To anyone inquiring within your branch territory, you might respond according to what is stated below. Our purpose for registering with the Department of Public Information as a non-governmental organization, NGO, in 1991 was to have access to research material available on health, ecological, and social problems at the United Nations library facilities. We had been using the library for many years prior to 1991, but in that year it became necessary to register as an NGO to have continued access. Registration papers filed with the United Nations that we have on file contain no statements that conflict with our Christian beliefs. Moreover, NGOs are informed by the United Nations that association of NGOs with the DPI does not constitute their incorporation into the United Nations system, nor does it entitle associated organization or their staff to any kind of privileges, immunities, or special status. Still, the criteria for association of NGOs, at least in their latest version, contain language that we cannot subscribe to. When we realized this, we immediately withdrew our registration. We are grateful that this matter was brought to our attention. We trust that the above is helpful in counteracting the attempts of opposers to discredit us. Please be assured of our warm Christian love and best wishes. Your brothers, Chairman's Committee. So there you have it, an official letter to cover your ass, CYA. Again, the Watchtower was claiming that they had it only for a library card, which was not true, and we'll discuss that later in the book. But they were also saying that nothing that they had on file conflicted with their Christian beliefs. And then lastly, they try and say that even though they're an NGO, they weren't even really considered a member of the United Nations. Yeah, right. And lastly, with this statement, the criteria for association of NGOs, at least in their latest version, contain language that we cannot subscribe to. When we realized this, we immediately withdrew our registration. Watchtower is heavily implying that the criteria changed at some point after it had become an NGO, and they were clueless about this change. Is that the case? Well, this is going to conclude Chapter 3. Please stay tuned for the next. Thank you for taking time to listen to my summary of Jehovah's Witnesses and the United Nations, How the Watchtower Society Fooled Millions. Post your comments, like and share this video, subscribe to my channel, and stay tuned for Chapter 4. So there